Brahms' Fourth Symphony in E minor is today generally acknowledged to be a mighty work, passionate, lyrical, highly communicative, and deeply satisfying. But this contemporary evaluation has not always been so. At one time, all Europe was fighting the battle of Brahms versus Wagner, and musical authorities in the highest places were fond of debunking Brahms as a dull, dry, thick, impotent, uninventive example of self-inflated mediocrity. How can it be that this musical giant, so adored in our time, so warm, so human in his directness of appeal, how can it be that this beloved Brahms can once have been so maligned? Well, it's true. Let me read you a short passage of criticism by another composer of Brahms' time and place, Hugo Wolf, writing in the Vienna Salonblatt, 1886. Quote, "He, Brahms, never could rise above the mediocre, but such nothingness, hollowness, such mousy obsequiousness as in the E minor symphony has never yet been revealed so alarmingly in any of Brahms' works. The art of composing without ideas has decidedly found in Brahms one of its worthiest representatives. Like God Almighty, Brahms understands the trick of making something out of nothing. Enough of this hideous game." Unquote. And Hugo Wolf was not alone. Tchaikovsky's diary contains scurrilous words of abuse on the subject, and we have only to look at old copies of the New York Post, the Musical Courier, the London Saturday Review, the Boston Traveler, and there stands an indictment of Brahms. And with an overwhelming consistency, they all agree on one basic fault: lack of invention. Poor blind people. How could they not see that invention is the very substance of all Brahms' greatness? As a matter of fact, old Hugo Wolf inadvertently put his finger on the key to the whole problem when he said that Brahms knew the trick of creating something out of nothing. For that's exactly what Brahms did. Well, not out of nothing, to be accurate about it. That, in Wolf's words, is reserved for God Almighty. But out of almost nothing, out of ideas and themes which in themselves may seem uneventful, but which turn out to be loaded with symphonic dynamite. Our concern here is to find out how Brahms goes about this strange and difficult job of symphonic invention, how he creates something out of nothing. Actually, we are asking the old basic question: what is a symphony? What is the nature of a symphony? What makes a symphony symphonic? Well, I'm sure that by this time you have all been told over and over again what a symphony is. First, that it is a musical form. That is correct. It is an orchestral sonata. Then you undoubtedly know that it is classically in 4 movements, the first of which is an allegro in sonata form. That is also correct. You are aware that this first sonata movement is normally followed by a slow song-like movement, then by a playful 3-part movement called a scherzo, and finally by a brilliant finale, usually in rondo form. All these facts are also correct. You probably even know by rote the essential breakdown of the sonata form first movement, the 2 contrasting themes connected by a transition section, which form the so-called exposition, the development section, in which these themes are metamorphosed and transmogrified in all kinds of ways, the recapitulation or reprise of the exposition, and the coda, or concluding section, which sums up the whole story. All this is correct, but all this doesn't begin to let you in on the symphonic secret. And that secret lies in the understanding of the word development. Once you are aware of how music gets developed, then you can begin to appreciate the building process, which is the essence of the symphonic idea. Only then will you begin to know what a symphony is. Well, let's attack the music itself and see what we find. I propose a slow voyage through the first movement of this E minor symphony, stopping constantly to observe and enjoy the wonders to be found in it, and examining the threads of development as Brahms weaves them into a symphonic texture. Our journey begins without introduction or preliminary fussing, with a simple statement of the main theme by the violins. Now, this melody is distinguished by several characteristics, all of them providing clues to the nature of the whole work to follow. Consisting as it does of a series of two-note groups separated by little rests or breathing pauses, we are given the impression of a breathlessness, a sort of panting that betokens some kind of emotional agitation. La-ding, dee-dum, da-ding. But there is another quality controlling this agitation, classical symmetry, which manages to contain the passion in a mold. Can you hear the symmetry? It's as though whatever Brahms does on the left, he must immediately repeat on the right, like a series of questions and answers or balancing weights. Left, right, left, right, and left, and right, and left, and right. And then there is the fact that each of these two-note groups begins on the weakest part of the measure, the last little beat. And this further helps the feeling of agitation, since you get a pulse exactly where you least expect one, off the beat, almost like a syncopation. The passionate quality is also bolstered by the accompaniment, made by the lower strings playing wide-range arpeggios, which gives a sense of surging waves one after another. To say nothing of the syncopated offbeats in the woodwinds, which lend even a further agitation. Did you notice that these woodwind offbeats are in themselves a version of the violin melody? They follow almost literally the notes of the theme, only displaced to make a rhythmic figuration. So we already have, from the very first bar of the piece, a kind of thematic development going on. This is the first ray of light illuminating the secret we are after, development. We know that we're in symphonic waters the moment this theme begins. The theme has yet another way of telling us that it is ushering in a symphonic expression, in that it does not pose as a tune, a complete sung melody, but rather as an incomplete melodic line, which is what a theme really is. A theme has to be incomplete, open at the ends, so to speak, so that it requires development, begs for it, in fact, to give it fulfillment. A self-sufficient closed melody like Liebestraum or something would not need this kind of development, since it's satisfying in itself, and therefore doesn't necessitate the symphonic outgrowth to follow. Perhaps that's why so many people find symphonic music difficult, because they're not getting what they expect. The trick is simply not to expect Liebestraum, a full-blown, spun-out, complete tune, but an incomplete one, like this melody of Brahms, which has a symphonic nature. Now listen to how he continues the melody, adding this new germ, and this one, which is a development of the first motive, a development achieved by doubling its speed. This device is called diminution in the jargon of the trade. Then there are these two other elements added, and this one. Each of these elements begs for full realization through development. The whole theme is only the combination of all the elements together. Do you see now what a symphonic theme is? How many seeds have already been planted for future growth? And this growth begins immediately with a repetition of the theme, but already with new wrinkles. The violins still carry the melody, but now are broken into octave leaps. Against it, the violas and the woodwinds are toying with new figurations, like embroidery. While the bass line is playing the theme again on the offbeats, as the woodwinds had done earlier. All this together makes a restatement of the theme, which is in itself a development of it. Now Brahms takes the second germ motive, you remember? And begins to feel out the possibilities that lie in it. And here we begin to sense another kind of developmental technique, that of searching out new keys or tonalities in which the theme can be seen from new angles. Now a new development of that same figure, this time through a rhythmic change. What was this has suffered a rhythmic displacement of accent, so that the phrase begins on the offbeat like a syncopation. You see how this heightens the intensity of the melody. By this simple rhythmic device, Brahms has breathed a new passion into an already passionate melody. And finally, this restatement of the theme develops that motive of diminution we spoke of before, answering it in the bass, and then by a double diminution, in other words, by making it go 4 times as fast as at first. Now here is the complete restatement of the theme with all those developments we have noted. Now think of it. We have so far had only 44 bars of music, fairly quick bars at that, of only 2 beats apiece. And in that short space, we have already witnessed development of the first theme through rhythm, key change, diminution, double diminution, embroidery, imitation, syncopation, a staggering array, showing enough inventiveness for a whole symphony. And it is all still concerned with one theme, the first theme. We are now only at the transition section, which will carry us forward to a new key in which the second theme will be stated. Now this transition section contains new germinal motives significant enough to be called themes in themselves. But more important, no sooner do they appear than they are already undergoing some kind of development, just as the first theme did. You see, that's what a symphonic mind like Brahms is like. It immediately spots the possibilities in any given group of notes and exploits them to the hilt, just as a great novelist develops the possibilities of his characters through every word they utter. Now, the first motive of the transition section is based on a descending scale, which is going to be very important in themes to come, as you will see. But as it appears here, it is already developed through the device of a canon. That is, it is immediately imitated by another orchestral voice. Now, the second motive of the transition section, a kind of tragic fanfare, which is also going to figure prominently throughout the development of the movement. In this fanfare, you may have noticed a new rhythm, strongly pronounced and almost balletic. Almost like a tango, isn't it? Well, Brahms now takes this rhythmic germ and makes out of it the accompaniment of the next transitional theme. And over this strong rhythm, the cellos and horns sing out a big romantic tune. So that altogether, it really does sound like some sort of a huge, mad German tango. Which brings back the fanfare again, now developed through a change of key. Now, taking those last two notes, Brahms builds a whole new section out of them, using the pizzicato strings and the woodwinds as antiphonal choirs. That's real musical architecture, taking the last fragment of one section and creating the succeeding one out of it. But what is so special and so typical of this great symphonic mind is that this new section is at the same time a development of the very first theme, which, if you remember, also went in groups of two notes. So that when this section occurs, born of a whole other germ, it automatically, perhaps unconsciously, develops the first theme as well. You see how deep the wells of genius are. Everything connects and is unified at the deepest level. It is all one, just as the novel War and Peace, with all its mass of material and events and characters, is all one. Now the transition section concludes with two restatements of that descending scale we heard before. First, we hear it syncopated in the winds, with the pizzicato strings underneath. And then immediately in a dotted rhythm by the strings, which burst out of their pizzicato chains, released and free. Now, this last version of the descending scale is again in anticipation of themes to come. It is a shadow cast before the coming event, because in the second theme, which is now about to be heard, this same scale in the dotted rhythm will be used as an integral part of the theme itself, so that, amazingly enough, we can say that the second theme has actually been developed even before it has been stated. These are the intricacies of the symphonic concept, wheels within wheels, all part of one great machine. Here is that second theme. Do you see how symphonically this second theme is constructed? It begins quietly, like brand new material. But as it continues, it employs the descending scale we have already heard, which is then repeated a tone higher. Following which, Brahms, in true symphonic style, takes the last fragment of the scale and develops it in a descending sequence. Making it not just a tune, but a self-developing tune, which is the essence of growth in a symphony. At the bottom of this descent, we have arrived at a mysterious moment. with distant trumpet calls ushering in a development of those fanfares we heard before in the transition, but which approach nearer and nearer and grow to climactic proportions. And so the exposition, having stated, restated, and developed all the material of the movement, concludes with a reference to the very opening theme, which returns us temporarily to our home key of E minor, from which we have strayed during our wanderings in the second theme department. This brings us to the development section proper. Now, it seems almost redundant to call this the development section, since we have had so much development already. No theme or thematic fragment so far has been stated without being somehow or other developed. And yet now Brahms is ready and eager to plunge into a whole new development section in which he will show us still further and deeper qualities inhabiting his themes, just as the novelist shows us his characters in ever-changing, always new lights. The development begins where the exposition left off, treating of the opening theme. We hear it first exactly as it was heard in the opening of the movement, as though this were going to be a literal repeat of the exposition, as used to be the custom with Mozart and Beethoven. But no, there's the difference, the harmonic difference. Did you hear the difference? Whereas in the exposition, the harmony was agitated and passionate. Now it is calm and pastoral. This character in the novel has undergone a visible change. The development is further aided by diminution. Listen to how the phrase becomes compressed and condensed. This compressed phrase now turns into the embroidery of the next section, as if by magic. Symphonic sleight of hand, that's what it is. And what is it embroidering? Another version of the first theme, in which those famous two-note groups we noted before have now expanded into three-note groups. I am sure you can hear that this is the same theme, whether it goes in groups of two notes or three notes. It's only another version of the original, an expanded, more abundant version. And coupled with the embroidery, which is also a flowering of the same branch, we feel a true development, a sense of increase and growth. And now even a further growth through a dynamic increase as the orchestra bursts into a roaring, all-out development of those three-note groups. Now that's development. Not only in a dynamic sense, but harmonically, contrapuntally, rhythmically, dramatically. Also, it's a bit complicated. For instance, did you notice that a canon was going on? A three-note group up high, imitated immediately by a three-note group down low, making a canon. But did you notice also that the imitation is always a mirror reflection of the thing it's imitating? If the upper three notes descend, the lower three notes ascend, and vice versa. This is called a canonic inversion, not so difficult to understand. It simply means a canon where the imitation is upside down. And added to all these canonic goings-on, the horns and woodwinds are enjoying a canon of their own, based on the embroidery we heard a moment ago, which was in turn an outgrowth of that compressed phrase, remember? Which was in turn a development of this original germ. As we said before, wheels within wheels. And this canon too is inverted. While the horns play, the woodwinds imitate upside down. But the real development is still to come. Incredible as it seems, Brahms has by no means exhausted the potential of those seeds he planted in the exposition. This exciting section of canons we just finished lands us in a new area of sudden quiet, of an almost mystic stillness, where the fanfare theme has been taken away from the brass and given to hushed strings and winds in an atmosphere no longer of assertiveness, but of eerie suspension. And into this suspended atmosphere, the winds recall the opening motive as a two-note group, then as a three-note group, and then in an even more expanded rhythmic way. On through key after key, this development goes, finally combining with the fanfare itself. Did you hear how the two themes finally came together? The horn playing the two-note group as the winds played the fanfare. Again, this is development along the lines of a novel, where two characters about whom we have already learned a great deal finally meet and a new situation is created. It is this new situation here in the symphony, this crisis, that catapults the next sequence into action, as if the meeting of these two characters had set off a sudden, violent chain of events. Real drama. The chain of events has culminated, as you just heard, in this climactic triplet figure. And out of it, in the sudden quiet, Brahms fashions a variation of the opening tune. Variations, of course, are among the leading devices of development, since by definition their function is to re-examine any given theme from a new point of view. Thus, the opening motive gets involved with that climactic triplet figure, and the variation is born. But just in case you missed the connection, Brahms has supplied clarifying clues in the pizzicato strings and flutes, which actually outline the theme in its original form on the offbeats. Altogether, it sounds like this. Now the second germ of the theme gets a going over, modulating from key to key and finally returning us to the home key of E minor, where the recapitulation or reprise can finally take place. And here we are back home, ready for the rehearing of the exposition according to the rules of sonata form. But Brahms is not content to abide by so bald a procedure. He has one more developmental card up his sleeve, and so he begins the recapitulation not literally, but with the opening theme greatly expanded in time, occupying a period 3 times as long as it originally did. This is development through what is called augmentation, the exact opposite of diminution, which we talked about before, and which Brahms has already used several times. And so the theme now sounds like this. How awesome this statement is. You can't explain it away simply through a word like augmentation. So technical a device never explained anything. It is awesome because of how he uses it, where and when he uses it, at exactly the right moment, with a spaciousness of orchestration, with those mysterious woodwind octaves, arriving at such a vibrant resolution, with the strings murmuring and the timpani trembling underneath. And so Brahms has not just begun a reprise, but has sneaked us into it without our being aware of it through a development. Always his method is that of change, growth, metamorphosis, and that is the symphonic secret. But once he has sneaked back into the reprise, he can now afford to be literal, having had so much development right from the start, so that the recapitulation is going to be exactly the exposition all over again. Germs, transitions, fanfares, embroideries, descending scales, the big German tango, the dotted rhythms, all of it with one difference, that this time he does not leave the tonality of E, since the movement must conclude in the key in which it began. So we arrive at the coda, and again here Brahms does not just literally finish the reprise and start the coda, but again sneaks us into the coda by whipping up a new development of the fanfare theme into a frenzy of excitement, again topped by that climactic triplet figure. Here is how he whips it up, one of the most thrilling passages in all Brahms. At this dizzying height of intensity and passion, we hear the main theme again for the last time at its strongest and most declamatory, and of course in canon. As it now continues to the overwhelming finish, the various germs of the theme are churned up, beaten, developed to their uttermost limit, almost to the breaking point, as if the characters of our novel were all caught in the blazing denouement of their relationships and go down in battle, except for our hero, the gigantic opening theme, still standing bloody and triumphant on this tragic battlefield of E minor. Well, we have had a microscopic look at symphonic method, and perhaps now we can understand a little better what the nature of a symphony is. That it is not just the jello mold of sonata form or rondo form, but form in the sense of constant growth, unceasing development, the creativity of life itself. I have purposely restricted our investigation to the first movement only, in order to use our time for a more thorough look at developmental techniques, bar by bar. If there were time, we would apply the same microscope to the other three movements and find other techniques, but always the same symphonic process at work. And yet the variety is fantastic, all due to his extraordinary powers of invention, which brings us back to poor old Hugo Wolf, who lamented that Brahms invented something out of nothing. Well, to be frank, I don't consider this theme nothing. Do you? Or the second movement themes, this one, and this beautiful second theme, or the scherzo theme, or the Passacaglia theme. Are these themes nothing? Far from it. But the wonder is that whether or not they are nothing, Brahms has worked the miracle. For there is something divine in symphonic growth, something akin to creation itself. And Brahms' critics, thinking to condemn him, have only succeeded in offering him the highest possible praise. Thank you, Hugo Wolf, for showing us the light.